that could trigger hundreds of billions in default and Greece leaving the Eurozone. So that's why everyone's on such edge in Europe. And it also is why there's more talk in Europe about Glass-Steagall, about who should bear the risk. Should it be governments or should it be the banks? And why should the Germans and the Finns and the Netherlands, the three countries that are in positive ground, why should they have to underwrite the trillions in debt of these banks? And that's the other thing that everybody's keeping their eyes on.
Well, Harley, I wanted to ask you about all the doublespeak that we're seeing here. I want to cite a couple of words, and then I want to ask you if the Germans are getting fed up, because I don't think in America most of the people recognize, most of the sheeple I don't think recognize the doublespeak. One of the doublespeak terms is bailout. When they talk about bailing out Greece or bailing out anyone in the Eurozone, it's not a bailout at all, is it, Harley? It's austerity. It's bankster stranglehold on humanity, because nobody's getting free money. This isn't a bailout, is it?
No, it's a transfer of wealth from the countries that are still producing a surplus, like Germany, to the banks. And it's done in the name of the country, but it's going well beyond the debt of these countries. For example, let's take a perfect case of Greece. One of the reasons Greece has so much debt is that when Mario Draghi was the head of Goldman Sachs Europe, and he's now, remember, the European Central Bank Director from 2002 to 2005. He was the managing director of Goldman Sachs International. He was one of the people involved in drawing up swap agreements that provided a certain amount of money for Greece that on their account, not to the country, but it made it look like Greece was more solvent so that banks would continue to loan them money. And so here's a guy who ran a fraud, very similar to the LIBOR rigging of rates, and was promoted for it. Now, this is exactly what you're talking about. As a result of this, Greece owes the money on the swaps that were written that the government never really needed. This was a risk management tool which was based on interest rate changes. And the companies, the banks that sold them the swaps, knew that the rates were going to stay down because they were rigging the rates. So they were sticking the Greeks with the cost of the credit default swaps. That's the same thing happened to the state of Massachusetts. The same thing happened to cities all over the United States. They were essentially robbed by these investment bankers who were working with the bankers who were rigging the rates. That's one of the reasons you need Glass-Steagall. That's also why we need criminal prosecutions. And the first person who should be prosecuted is Tim Geithner, who from 2006 to 2008 oversaw what was happening with the LIBOR rates. And he issued one memo where he said maybe we should do something about it, but never did anything. And he was rewarded by being put in as Treasury Secretary, where he's continued to protect the criminal fraud of bankers. So this is exactly your point, that the bankers are getting away with murder, and countries are being told that in order to keep their accounts solvent on the books, they have to cut health care, they have to cut programs for infrastructure, for education. In Greece, the government is not providing money to doctors for the services they're providing under the health system. The pharmaceuticals are being cut because they can't afford it. And people are dying because they can't get their medicine.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally crimes against humanity, for which The Hague apparently has just set up a special division for financial crimes against humanity, which our friend Rob Kirby told me about in an interview recently. Rob also said that his reaction to this Draghi press conference on Friday was that it was Monty Python-esque in its absurdity. And now Jim Sinclair is citing another one of these Orwellian doublespeak bankster terms, sterilized bond buying. He says that global coordinated sterilized bond buying is imminent, and gold is going to 3,500. And here's the thing. They actually want the sheeple to believe that sterilized, endless bond purchases or bond buying doesn't equate to money printing, Harley. It's the height of absurdity.
And that there's no risk. Well, here's another term for you. They're calling this outright monetary transactions, or OMTs. And I think someone in Britain called this the on my tab, because they're saying this would be the mother of all credit cards. They're just filled with these kinds of phrases, but what it covers up is something that's actually very simple. And this was one of the presentations I heard at Altbach by William White, who was a former deputy director of the Bank of Canada, who made a really interesting point. He said, with nations that go insolvent, you have to help the people. You have to figure out a way to get them back on their feet. But when banks go insolvent, the idea that you're going to somehow save them by having the central bank print money and put it to their account, that doesn't improve their insolvency. The only way to improve the insolvency of a bank is to put their bad assets through bankruptcy reorganization, price them at the market, and let them eat the losses. Now, if you don't do that, all you're doing is building a hyperinflationary bubble. And what Draghi did was essentially say to the Germans, the Bundesbank and the German parliament no longer matter. Your boss is now Super Mario at the European Central Bank, and you either kneel down to him or you will pay the consequences.
So
I think the Germans are getting quite upset with this.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you, sort of jump on your line there. Are the Germans going to put up with this?
Well, unfortunately, the problem with Germany, and this is something that goes back to the beginning of the European Union, is that in 1989, when the communist regime in East Germany fell, and by the way, Erich Honecker, who was the head of the communist regime, said the same thing Draghi is saying today. He said, there's no alternative to the Socialist Democratic Republic of Germany. It will live for 1,000 years. Draghi is saying there's no alternative to the euro. That's why we have to save it. What happened when the East Germany fell, the East German communist regime fell, and there was a unification, the price that Helmut Kohl had to pay for unification was the euro, was that the Germans would have to back up the establishment of a single currency that would bring in nations such as Spain, Greece, Portugal, that were not ready to be part of a common currency, even if you would wish to have one. And the Germans were essentially told they have to do it because they were responsible for the two wars of the 20th century. And, you know, if you really go back in history, what you'll find is that the British Empire organized World War I, and then a group of bankers from Britain and the United States put Hitler in power and unleashed him in World War II. So the British, I think, deserve more of the blame than the Germans. But what's been done is they're using German guilt to say that the Germans have the responsibility, have the necessity of transferring money from Germany, from German physical production, to keep the banks solvent in the name of protecting these poorer countries. And what's happening is there's a fight in the Christian Democratic Union, which is Merkel's party. She's the chancellor. The Christian Social Union, which is the Bavarian branch, the southern German branch of the CDU, is also in rebellion. But the problem is leadership. You don't have leadership in Europe because the parliamentary system is inherently flawed. Now, we have a constitutional system where we should be able to have changes. But as long as the American people buy into the idea that there's a choice between Romney and Obama, when there's really not, it's the two of the same, although my personal view and Mr. LaRouche's view is that Obama has to be stopped and thrown out of office, the sooner the better. That's not a support of Romney, but we've just got to stop Obama.
Absolutely. And I just want to circle back real quickly. I know we have to let you go here in a few minutes. For anybody who's doubting what Harley said about World War I or World War II, I invite you to go back and do your own research in regards to just one person in American history. His name is Prescott Bush. He was the grandfather and father to two American presidents, and he tried, along with the banksters, to essentially have a coup of the United States government because they wanted to roll out a fascist bankster government. They recruited General Smedley Butler, who blew the whistle on them. Research it for yourself. It's all fact. Harley, I'd be
Let me just say on that quickly, Sean, our organization first turned up the Prescott-Bush connection to Hitler because we went into the Library of Congress and found that under the Trading with the Enemy Act in 1942, in September of 1942, the Roosevelt administration prosecuted the Bank of New York, whose two American directors were Roland Harriman, the brother of Averell Harriman, and Prescott Bush. And the Bank of New York was giving money to the Hitler government from the 1930s up through 1942, which means after war was declared against Germany, after we started sending soldiers to fight the Germans in North Africa, the Harriman-Busch Bank was continuing to fund the Nazis through Fritz Thyssen of Thyssen Industries. And this we found in the Library of Congress. We published it. We did an unauthorized biography of George Bush Sr. And after that came out, there were new laws passed which limit access to these files in the Library of Congress.
Yeah, thanks for that, Harley. And everybody, you just need to read between the lines. You can't throw Harley Schlanger and the LaRouche organization under the bus for propaganda that may be being told about them, be it from AIPAC or Southern Poverty Law Center over the years or whoever. It's the same forces that are now targeting the liberty movement and patriots for being patriots and for standing up for the Bill of Rights. It's something that everybody needs to find the truth on their own, but just research what Harley and I just talked about. Harley, I need to ask you about gold and silver. The breakout we're seeing is just absolutely blowing the doors off here, and I think the paradigm is changing because the bankster paper doesn't seem to be able to suppress the move in the physical precious metals or in the paper prices of the metals. What is your take? What are you seeing?
Well, if Draghi is not stopped, and if Obama gets a second term, we're going to see a hyperinflation that will probably tend toward what we saw in Weimar Germany in 1923, because there's no credit for physical production. It's all going into bailouts. And we're already seeing food prices skyrocketing, gas prices going up, and I think the precious metals are benefiting in terms of the prices going up from that. But we're just at the beginning of an inflationary trend. And even the German press was commenting on this. Bild Zeitung, which is the largest circulation newspaper in Germany, had an article today which said after Draghi, this was a black day for the euro and for all of us. And they said we're on the verge of a new inflation. So I think that the people who are involved with precious metals will tell you that as you debase a currency, where do people go? What's left? And I think that's really the problem. Either we get back to a constitutional determination of money supply, which we go back to Article 1, Section 8, get rid of the Federal Reserve, get rid of these too-big-to-fail banks, put in regulations because banking has to be regulated. That's what our revolution was about. If we don't do that, people can go to gold and silver, but we may not have a nation. And I think it's important that, for me, I'm not advocating an investment strategy. I'm just telling people what the consequences of these policies will be.
And that, my friends, is why we talked to Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization, Truth, Honor, Liberty. Harley, direct from Austria, thanks so much for your time. As always, one of my favorite guests. I really appreciate your perspective and your generosity of your time. Tell people how they can find the LaRouche organization work.
The best place is to go to LarouchePAC.com, which is LarouchePAC.com. And I'll just tell you one thing, Sean. September 8th, Lyndon LaRouche turns 90 years old.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, actually, and I know we were low on time. I was thinking that he was 92, but 90, yeah, it's amazing, 90 years old, and still being such a forceful, and the faculties, I mean, he's got all his faculties about him. Nobody speaks with a sharper tongue.
Well, he said he's going to fight till he has no breath left in him, and I think you can take him at his word on that.
Yeah, and I got to say this one more time. I'm not a member of the LaRouche organization, but I support what you guys are doing because I've always said, Harley, and I think we're all coming together on the left and right now to recognize this, especially after we saw what happened at the RNC and the DNC. At this point, it's humanity versus the banksters.
It's above party. It's above narrow local focus. We've got to save the human race, and the best tool we have is the restoration of the U.S. Constitution.
Thanks, Harley. Thanks so much for your time. Travel safe and keep in touch. We'll talk to you when you get back.
Okay, Sean.
Thanks, Harley. Bye-bye.
Well, that does it, guys. Thanks so much for watching and spreading this information with friends and family. Together, we can take liberty back. And check out my new website, thelibertymill.com. Real news, 24/7. Thanks for watching. Good night.